White surgeon refused to operate on his daughter until he learned who her father was. What happens when a renowned surgeon refuses to save a 6-year-old girl just because of the color of her skin? He had no idea who her father was. What followed left the entire country stunned. That day, the air in Springfield City Children's Hospital was thick, not warm and sweet like grandma's molasses cake. No, this was a heavy, sterile kind of thickness, like syrup that stuck to your skin and refused to let go. It clung to your throat, your hair, your soul. Camilla Lawrence had smelled this kind of air before, too many times. It was the scent of indifference, clinical, casual, dangerous. It always floated in spaces where lives hung in the balance, but empathy had long since left the building. Her daughter Amelia lay limp on a hospital gurney in front of her, 6 years old, barely breathing, small hands twitching now and then, as if her body was fighting something, even in unconsciousness. Her skin, the soft brown of milky coffee, had taken on a strange gray hue, and her lips were dry and cracked like they hadn't seen water in days. There were dark circles under her eyes that no 6-year-old should wear. Camilla held that little hand, the same one she held on her baby's first day of daycare, the same one she clutched through long nights of fevers and lullabies. That hand was cold now, frighteningly cold. Her heart beat like a war drum in her chest as she whispered over and over, "Just hold on, baby. Just hold on. Where is the doctor?" Camilla barked, her voice raw from desperation. It was the third time she'd asked in 15 minutes. The nurse behind the desk gave her that tired, fixed smile, one that said, "I'm just doing my job," but didn't hide the reality that she didn't see Camilla as a person in crisis, just another name in a long, forgettable list. "The surgeon is on the way, ma'am," the nurse answered flatly, eyes never leaving the computer screen. Camilla narrowed her eyes. "Yeah, on the way from Mars, apparently." And just then the double doors swung open. Enter Dr. Thomas Grayson. His lab coat was so white it practically glowed under the fluorescent lights, his silver hair perfectly trimmed, and his face wore that smug, polished calm that screamed, "I am the system, and the system is working just fine. For me." He didn't rush, didn't even glance at the child dying 3 feet from him. No urgency, no curiosity. He stopped at the nurse's station, scanned his tablet, and clicked his tongue like he was reviewing a menu. "Patient?" he asked with the interest of a man reading weather reports. "Yes." Camilla stepped forward, voice breaking. "My daughter. She's 6. She's in pain, vomiting, pale. The EMT said it could be internal bleeding. You have to." "Ma'am?" He cut her off like a blade, finally looked at her, straight on. But that gaze wasn't of concern. It was the look one gives a scuff on a shoe or a coffee stain on a white tablecloth. "Our main OR is occupied. When it's available, we'll evaluate. Until then, please wait." "Wait?" Camilla's eyes flared with disbelief. "She's dying and you're telling me to wait?" "I'm a surgeon," he said, folding his arms. "Not a therapist." There was silence, cold and violent, but someone did speak. An intern, a young Asian-American woman named Lena Cho, standing to the side with medical charts clutched in her hands. She looked nervous, but her voice didn't shake. "Dr. Grayson, the labs are already in. Severe anemia, possible splenic rupture. This requires immediate intervention." Grayson sighed, rolled his neck. "Call the junior surgeon. I've got a presentation tomorrow and I need my head clear. I'm not cutting into anyone tonight." And with that, he turned to walk away. Like Amelia was a broken toy on the floor. Not a child, not a person. Camilla moved fast, blocking his exit. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from a kind of rage only mothers know. The kind that turns bone to steel and breath to fire. "You're refusing to treat her because what?" she asked, voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Because she doesn't have the right insurance? Because she's not in a private suite? Or because her skin makes you uncomfortable?" Grayson froze for a second, didn't turn, just said, "I make clinical decisions, not emotional ones. You should be thankful we admitted her at all." "Next," and he walked out. Lena stepped forward, lowering her voice. "There's another surgeon in the East Wing. Young, not as seasoned, but different. We can't afford to wait. If you give me your consent, I'll move her now." Camilla didn't speak. She just nodded tightly, her lips pressed into a line so hard it could have cracked glass. Inside her, everything boiled. But it wasn't panic, not anymore. It was that cold, focused fury that settles in when you realize someone just filed your baby under expendable. In the operating room, Dr. Samir Khan, the junior surgeon, washed his hands like they were coated in gunpowder. His heart raced, but his hands were steady. Lena assisted him, her eyes locked on every movement, every beep of the heart monitor. They weren't waiting for permission. They were saving a life. Outside the OR, Camilla paced, Every minute that passed stretched into eternity. And while all that was happening, while a 6-year-old girl's life was being fought for in real time, doctors and admins down the hall sipped coffee, chuckled over spreadsheets, and planned golf weekends. That is, until the air shifted, because he arrived. The doors didn't just open. They surrendered, stepped aside. The hospital lobby fell into a strange hush as the man walked through. Tall, dark suit, sharp eyes, controlled fury. Julian Lawrence, not just wealthy, powerful, a billionaire with a conscience and a memory. The kind of man whose last name opened doors and closed mouths. "Where is Camilla Lawrence?" he asked, voice like thunder behind velvet. The receptionist blinked, stuttered. She was admitted critical condition. Her daughter. Dr. Grayson said it was low priority. Julian turned slowly toward the nearest doctor. "Find me the chief. Now before I call every lawyer I own and every reporter I feed." 3 minutes. That's how long it took. Dr. Grayson appeared, still holding his tablet like it was a shield. He tried to speak with authority, but his words stumbled. "Can I help?" "You can start by telling me why you left my daughter to die," Julian said. Grayson's face turned gray. I wasn't informed. I didn't know she was your—" "Exactly," Julian cut him off. "You didn't know, and that's why you treated her like a leftover on your tray. You looked at a sick little girl and decided her life didn't matter. Because her mom didn't wear diamonds. Because her chart didn't scream Harvard donor. Because she's black." Silence swept the hallway. Phones came out. Cameras started recording, but no one moved. Grayson tried to recover. I wasn't. "You were exactly what too many of us already know exists behind these walls," Julian said. "And I swear, on everything I have built, you will answer for it." Dr. Thomas Grayson, wrapped in the illusion of infallibility, sat in his office that morning like a king amidst his spoils, except his treasures weren't gold or jewels, but pristine charts, quarterly reports, and clients whose insurance plans boasted thicker portfolios than a middle-class family's retirement fund. He leaned back in his leather chair, yawning slightly as he rubbed his temples, letting his mind drift towards something comforting, maybe a frothy latte or a smooth, creamy cappuccino, because why stop at a regular coffee when you can have something as white and airy as his worldview? Just as he lifted his phone to order, there was a knock at the door so gentle it nearly got ignored. An intern stood there, paler than the office walls and trembling like a reed in the wind. "Dr. Grayson, sir, there's someone at reception. Julian Lawrence." Grayson paused mid-breath. He stared at the intern for a long, pregnant pause where time itself seemed to stop. "Who?" "Julian Lawrence, from LCA Holdings, Urban Futures. You know." Grayson straightened in his seat, a small tremor betraying his outward calm as he adjusted his collar. "Yes, I know him," he said simply, standing, the room echoing with the subtle authority of a man who'd never been challenged, until now. His steps down the corridor were deliberate and slow, but each one rumbled like distant thunder, announcing that a reckoning was near. Not a business scandal, but a collision with truth. At reception, Julian stood near the wall. He wasn't pacing or screaming, just poised, calm but potent, the kind of composure that betrayed an inner storm. In one hand he held his phone, the other a photo of Amelia, his little girl in a pink coat, clutching a stuffed bunny, eyes bright with innocence only yesterday. Dr. Grayson arrived, trying to reclaim his usual posture of control. Julian looked up, voice quiet yet unwavering. "Dr. Grayson," he began, his words precise and calm enough to freeze over the protest brewing in hospital corridors. "You refused to operate on my daughter." Grayson's expression flickered. He opened his mouth to speak, tried to form an excuse. "I didn't know who she was. I acted based on triage priorities." Julian interrupted, softly but incisively. "No, you acted based on black skin. Because you saw a girl and her mother in worn clothes rather than diamonds, you assumed she had no voice, no protection, no legal resources? You were wrong." Grayson's fist clenched behind his back, but his voice failed him. Every syllable Julian spoke was a stitch pulling apart Grayson's carefully constructed facade, unraveling the years of implicit bias that had been building in silence. Meanwhile, elsewhere within the same building, the real battle was being fought. Intern Lena Cho, with nervous clarity, assisted Dr. Samir Khan, a promising young surgeon who had been dismissed by some as inexperienced, until he proved otherwise under pressure. The operating room was thick with tension, the beep of monitors punctuating their every move. "Blood pressure's dropping," Lena called out, voice even but urgent. "Give her a liter. Stat. Where's anesthesia?" "In the room," came the hurried reply. Samir gripped the artery with unwavering focus. "Okay, almost there. Hold." Behind the OR glass, Camilla watched with her hands clasped to her chest, trying to steady her own racing heart. She didn't blink. She didn't dare. She prayed. "Mom," the nurse whispered softly but firmly. "Sit for a minute, please." "No," Camilla said, her voice quiet and strong. "I'm staying till she breathes." Upstairs in the office corridors, a storm of a different kind was brewing. Julian wasn't just standing there, arms crossed. He was taking deliberate steps toward accountability. His voice echoed down the halls. "I've already contacted the board of directors," he said, unwavering. "This hospital gets funded by my foundation. By tomorrow, you'll come seeking my silence. It's time you understood what happens when you sort lives by skin color." The deputy director swallowed hard. "Mr. Lawrence, don't call me that," Julian interrupted evenly. "Just remember this. You let one man turn a life-saving system into a system of discrimination." Outside, reporters and cameras had gathered. In minutes, the hospital's story became a national firestorm. Tweets were flying. "Billionaire takes on medical racism, and he's not backing down." Back in the OR, "It's done." Samir wiped his brow, the tension finally easing. The bleeding stopped. "He's stable," Lena exhaled, staring at the vitals. "Strong kid, just like her mom." They exchanged looks, not words. It wasn't just a successful surgery, it was a statement that courage, skill, and empathy could still win in a world that too often hesitated to believe that. An hour later, Amelia lay in the ICU, tunneled in blankets and memories, every beep and sigh comforting in its routine. Julian, still in his suit, though now with worry etched into the creases, sat by her bed, took her tiny hand in his. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering like sparrows at dawn. She blinked up at her father. "Daddy," she whispered, voice fragile. He swallowed hard, voice trembling before the strength came. "Always, sweetheart, always." Camilla stood behind him, the burnout moment of tears long since past. In her eyes was a reflection of something unshakable, exhausted pride, tempered hope, and an ember of resolve. Upstairs at the hospital boardroom, everyone sat around that polished glass table, papers and reports spread out like battlefield maps, each dossier a potential landmine, especially the thick one labeled Dr. Thomas Grayson, Patterns of Rejection. It documented 9 separate cases of emergency surgery denials, all children of color. 8 of them ended in tragedies, and he was responsible for them. The hospital director, pale and resolute, signed the suspension order. Grayson's office was emptied by noon. He left with nothing but a suitcase and a revoked badge. But he carried something heavier, a conscience now aware of his failures, a shame no insurance payout could ever fix. By early afternoon, Julian was already shaping a new cornerstone. He toured the hospital grounds, vision streaming like fresh light across dilapidated wings. His mission was clear. Amelia Lawrence Center for Equitable Medicine, a place where children weren't sorted by zip code or insurance status, but treated as precious lives deserving the best science and compassion offers. At the ribbon-cutting press event, Julian chose simplicity over flash. Jeans and a crisp shirt, no gold watches, no business jargon, just a man on a mission. "I'm no politician," he said, voice steady across the gathering. "I'm not a billionaire philanthropist by default. I'm a dad, and as a dad, my job was to feed my daughter soup, to read her stories, to tuck her in. Instead, I found myself here, fighting for her right to breathe easy in a hospital bed, just like any other kid in America, because someone decided her life wasn't worth holding up." He paused, the crowd exhaled. "Today, we turn the page. This center, Amelia's center, isn't just bricks and mortar. It's a promise that no child will ever be judged by where they come from, but by who they are and what they need." Hands came together, not polite applause, genuine tears, quiet nods, and whispers of gratitude. Because this wasn't just talk, this was change. Meanwhile, Dr. Grayson was far away, sidelined, teaching in a small, remote clinic that didn't ask uncomfortable questions, his license suspended, his career in smoldering ruins. He'd filed complaints, sent letters, pleaded for forgiveness, but no one answered. Because in medicine, there's no forgiveness for blindness to humanity. If you can't see the person, you're not a healer. You're just someone with tools and prejudice. Weeks later, inside that new pediatric wing, life began anew. Dr. Lena Cho was now Associate Chief of Surgery, a champion for equity and skill beyond her years. Dr. Samir Khan was leading pediatric trauma, and in the center's courtyard, Amelia stood, tiny but triumphant, playing under the afternoon sun, her laughter mixing with the breeze. A plaque on the entrance read, "Every life matters, but only if we act like it." That day, a little girl with a coffee-colored skin tone reminded the world that no child should be judged by anything but love and medical need, and that justice, once sparked by courage, can light up entire systems. The next morning, Before most people had even finished wiping the sleep from their eyes or taken the first sip of their too-hot coffee, the news had already swept across the country like a firestorm that couldn't be contained. Every major network, every social feed, every group chat buzzed with the same shocking headline: prestigious white surgeon refuses to operate on black child until he finds out who her father is. It was the kind of story that didn't need to be sensationalized. It was raw. It was real. And it exposed something far bigger than one man's arrogance. It pulled back the curtain on a system that had long been allowed to operate unchecked, a system that too often forgot that behind every chart, every diagnosis, every gurney rolling through those emergency room doors was a human being. At Springfield Children's Hospital, where the whole thing had gone down just hours earlier, the morning didn't start with rounds or reports. No, it kicked off with an emergency press conference. The lobby had been transformed into a press pit, cameras mounted like sentries, reporters buzzing like hornets, and microphones plastered with every media logo you could name. The hospital's director stood behind the podium, blinking like a man who had just remembered how air worked. He was pale, tired, and clearly not prepared to face the music that had already started playing on every screen from coast to coast. The spotlight was ruthless. And of course, Dr. Thomas Grayson was nowhere in sight. His office had already been cleaned out, his name removed from the wall like it had never been there. That's how fast truth can catch up when it's chasing a lie with legs. But the real storm, it wasn't in front of the cameras, and it was upstairs where the board of directors sat, tucked into a glass-walled boardroom with leather chairs, polished coffee tables, and enough anxiety in the air to curdle milk. The smell of roasted beans couldn't quite cover the sweat. The mood? Think a country club caught in a scandal. Nervous, confused, and desperately hoping someone else would speak first. And at the center of that table sat Julian Lawrence, not pacing, not fuming, just sitting, calm, controlled. Dangerous in that way only the truly prepared can be. His lawyer sat beside him, a woman with sharp eyes and a face that said, "We're not here for a debate. We've already won." And across from them, 20 board members, most of them white, most of them male, and all of them feeling, for the first time in a long while, what it was like to be on the receiving end of justice. "Gentlemen," Julian began, voice steady and low, the kind of voice that doesn't raise pitch because it doesn't have to. "I didn't come here to perform. I didn't come here to threaten. Though let's be honest, you should feel threatened." A few stiffened. One cleared his throat. "I came here," Julian continued, "because my daughter nearly died in your care. And not because your equipment failed, not because your staff was overwhelmed, but because your system is broken by design, and it nearly cost my little girl her life." A shaky voice from the far end tried to interject. "Mr. Lawrence, we understand this situation is—" "You don't understand anything," Julian interrupted, flatly but with fire beneath the calm. "You've spent years pretending not to see the patterns. You've ignored the numbers. Your surgeons have refused procedures for children on Medicaid. Your nurses have filed complaints that disappeared into HR black holes. And while kids were denied care, you were busy counting profits and patting yourselves on the back for your community outreach programs." He pulled out a tablet, tapped once. A graph appeared on the screen behind him. Red bars climbing, climbing, climbing. 9 refused emergency surgeries. 9 in the last 2 years. Every single one was a child of color. Every single one assigned to Dr. Grayson. And you promoted him. There was silence. Not the kind that comes from agreement, but the kind that comes when no one knows how to lie fast enough. "We didn't know," someone whispered. Julian leaned forward. "That is your failure. You chose not to know." The air was so still, even the humming from the air vents seemed to hush. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. "So here's what's going to happen," Julian said, sitting back. "You're going to initiate an independent investigation into your surgical practices, publish a report on disparities in treatment, fire the current leadership, including your board president, and adopt a new patient care policy that includes equity benchmarks. Or, I pull every dime from this institution, not just my donations, every cent tied to my name. And I won't stop there." Someone shifted, a throat cleared. Another whispered a curse under their breath, but no one said no. 30 minutes later, the board voted, unanimously. Damage control wasn't an option anymore. The only thing left was a reckoning. Meanwhile, down in the pediatric ICU, little Amelia Lawrence lay curled under a pastel blanket, surrounded by stuffed animals and constant doting care. Nurses came by every 20 minutes, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They had seen her face. They had read her chart. They had watched the footage from the night before, and they understood exactly who that child was. a line in the sand that had changed everything. Camilla sat beside her daughter's bed, eyes red but dry. The tears had dried up sometime between the rage and the relief. What remained now was something quieter, heavier, pride, exhaustion, and a strange, lingering fire that wouldn't go out anytime soon. Amelia stirred, opened her eyes, looked up at her mother. "Mom," she asked softly, "I had a dream. I was a doctor, but not like that man. I was nice." Camilla smiled through her tight throat. "You're already better than him, baby. Already." The next day, just outside the hospital's front entrance, a stage had been assembled for a public unveiling. But this wasn't just another ribbon-cutting ceremony with politicians in suits and empty speeches about progress. This was something different. People came from every corner of the city, activists, nurses, parents who had lost children, doctors who had stayed silent too long, and neighbors who had never seen the inside of that hospital until now but had always felt its silent judgments from the outside. And when Julian Lawrence stepped onto that stage, he wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, because this moment wasn't about prestige or power. It was about fatherhood, humanity, justice. "I'm not a politician," he began, speaking not into microphones but into hearts. "I'm not a philanthropist by profession. I'm just a dad, and I should have been sitting next to my daughter, feeding her soup and reading her bedtime stories. But instead I was out here fighting for her right to live, in a hospital, in America, in the 21st century, because someone decided her skin color made her less important." He paused. "Let it land. But today we turn the page," he continued. "This center, named for my daughter Amelia, is not just a building. It is a promise that no child will ever be denied care because they were born in the wrong zip code or with the wrong last name." Applause erupted. Loud, raw, real. The kind of applause that doesn't just say, "We agree," but says, "We're with you." And in the front rows, the tears weren't on the faces of parents alone. They were on the faces of nurses, of doctors, the ones who had stayed, who had spoken up, who had fought back from within, because they knew something the public didn't always see. Julian Lawrence didn't just talk. He made things happen. As for Dr. Grayson, he ended up across the country, teaching at a small private institution that didn't ask too many questions. His surgical license was suspended pending review. His name was removed from national directories. He filed complaints, letters, a plea for sympathy. No one listened, because in medicine, there's one unspoken truth every true doctor lives by. If you can't see the humanity in your patient, you've got no business calling yourself a healer. 1 month later, Lena Cho was promoted to Associate Chief of Surgery. Dr. Samir Khan became Director of Pediatric Trauma. And Amelia? She got better. She walked, slow at first, through the garden outside the new pediatric wing, the one with her name on the stone, the one with the mural painted by children, the one that now had a playground, a reading nook, and a wall that read, "Every life matters, but only if we act like it."